piece. PBS distributed the show. PBS did not pay for any of the production. It was all done through Tavis's production company.
Right.
And so the question then becomes, if they're distributing the show, what oversight do they actually have if this is his production company, his staff, he's paying the people?
Their airwaves.
What's their role in this?
Well, you have to look at their contract, but I'm sure they have standards in that contract. That is the distribution contract. You look at that, it will have standards in there that, notwithstanding the fact that they don't produce the show, that to publicize it, to distribute it, they have their standards that their contractors like Travis have to meet. And so they have every right to investigate. They have every right to say, no, we don't want to distribute a show where the host and the CEO of that show engages in sexual relationships with subordinates that could amount to harassment. Because watch this. If someone sues Tavis Smiley, they could also include a PBS,
that's right.
And that's a risk factor for PBS that they can't ignore. And so, sure, whether they get dismissed from the lawsuit or not is a whole other story, but they certainly have opened themselves up.
Peace, fam. It's your brother Usman. Back again with another video. Now, in this video, I wanted to give a briefing of how to draft contracts. Okay. Now, this is an area of my expertise. I would say I'm pretty good at. Not because I say so, but because the people that I've written contracts for, they've said it. And my own business ventures, my own contracts, they tend to establish a very good understanding between myself and whoever I do business with. And the result is no issue over exactly what's supposed to be done and what's expected. All right. Now, one of the reasons we as a people don't do business with each other is because we don't know how to articulate on paper what our expectations are. And some of us are afraid of commitment as a result of that. All right. Now, if you don't know how to voice your concerns, needs, and goals in a joint venture with other people, you have no confidence that the goals can be accomplished, and you don't have any confidence that any discrepancies can be handled diplomatically. Now, even though people in the upper echelon of the social order run lucrative businesses, like Tavis Smiley, who has his own production company and staff to produce his own show, even he can be placed in a chokehold by contracts, and all his efforts basically derailed or vetoed, at least temporarily. And later on, we'll see how other creators who had their work crippled because of contracts in one way or another, how they've been affected as well, and how that affects the overall wealth of a generation of people. As I've said, contracts are trust are contracts. So doing this is not a third hat, but an integral part of trust law. Your intentions have to be crafted into precise instructions so that people completely understand the means and the outcome of the venture. Contracts are the instrumentalities of precision. And, contrary to popular belief, this is not a European exclusive, We know that the Native American Daganoweda was sought after by Benjamin Franklin, who subsequently followed the contractual template set by the Haudenosaunee, or the Iroquois Confederacy, which consisted of the Mohawk tribe, the Onondaga tribe, Oneida, Cayuga, Seneca, and the Tuscarora tribe. Franklin formed the unions with the colonies and based the United States Constitution based on what I would call the Iroquoian contracts. I mean, you can call them agreements, you can call them treaties, whatever you like, okay? But the basis of them are contracts. The Moors also formed similar treaties with the United States. So the concept of contract has been used, among other things, to even establish governments, to establish treaties, unions with nations. These are all contracts. All right, so this concept is not exclusively European. Okay, first off, a contract requires 4 essential elements to even be considered a contract. All right. Number 1, an oral or written consent, or rather an oral or written agreement. an exchange relationship. There has to be some value or consideration exchanged and or properties. At least one promise. So one of the parties has to promise to perform in a particular way, and the contract has to also be enforceable in law. Not just by default, when you have the first three elements, you're going to have the enforceability in law. Okay. The legality of that contract is based on an additional four elements. Okay. So you can have a contract, but that contract being legal is dependent upon consent of the parties involved. So both people have to, or all parties have to, willfully consent. They have to be able to contract, that is, of legal age. Okay. The contract has to have what they call a lawful object, but it's basically a lawful purpose. In other words, you can't contract, you can't hire somebody to kill another person. That's illegal. It's a contract, but it's illegal. And consideration. Okay, so there has to be a receipt of value for performance. Now, that value does not have to be a value that's dictated by the greater society. You know, it could be a value that is specific to each party. Okay, so for example, I can have someone do something for me, and in exchange, I can give them some time in terms of free time. Say if they need some handiwork done, or if they need some paperwork filed, I could do that. But that's a value to them and it's specific to them. Okay, so when you see value for performance, that does not automatically indicate that the value is to be of a numerical dollar amount per se. All right, so here we have what I would call a simple contract, and I'll show you why I say that once we breeze through this short contract. I picked a short contract that I drafted for one of my people to make it easy for you to grasp the important concepts or the most critical concepts and components of a contract. Okay, but I'll show you how this can get much more complex. It all depends on who you're dealing with. Okay, so your basic elements of a contract is the agreement. Okay, the date of the agreement, the parties that the agreement is between. In this case, we have Brazen Trust and Clive David. And yes, a trust can contract with someone. Okay. Remember, if you took the course or if you are privy to some of the webinar hall information that I have there, you'll know that a trust is a person. This agreement establishes the terms by which services will be provided for Brazen Trust by Clive Davis. Okay. And we state what Clive David shall do for Brazen Trust, which is Clive David shall host and moderate a blog talk show for Brazen Trust. Okay. And here where you say for and with Brazen Trust by Cain Smith, the trustee. Okay. Here we have the trustee, which is Cain Smith. And this is just indicating that Cain Smith will be acting for Brazen Trust. Okay, but the contract specifically notes that it is Brazen Trust that is receiving the services. And since, of course, a trust cannot act for itself, its trustee will be acting for it. This is why you have the by Cain Smith trustee. Okay, and you have the basic important components of the agreement. How long the agreement shall last. Then you have your second basic components, the payment. Now let me go back up here. I could actually have this portion right here where it says Clive Davis shall host and moderate blog talk show events for and with Brazen Trust. that could actually be this first provision, provision A. So as you'll see, these contracts can be very fluid. You can pretty much print them up. And again, there's no standard cement or concrete way that you draw up a contract. However, there are some concrete elements that a contract must contain. But I could have put this here and made it a provision, and this would have just been the agreement provision of what's agreed to. But I lumped it in here, and that really has no consequence on the bearing of the legality of this contract. Okay, got the agreement terms. I have the payment terms. Provision C, we have the time constraints. The meetings and assignments shall be fulfilled by all parties if at all possible. Due notice at least 3 days shall be given in the event any party cannot make a scheduled meeting or assignment. Any rescheduled event will be forwarded to a later date but shall be considered within the payment amount agreed upon irrespective of the timeline extension. Now what this provision says basically is just that if any of the parties cannot meet the scheduled dates or times that these events are supposed to be done, then they'll give 3 days notice to the other party, to the opposite party, that they can't make the event. However, that event will be rescheduled for a later date for the same amount. So let's just say for the entire 12-week period and the 12 events, that there is a $200 payment done. Okay, for the whole. Let's just say there's $200 for the whole project. If for some reason within that 12 weeks one of the events is not done, that event will be rescheduled later to another date, and it will still be under that $200 payment. Okay, this is akin to a magic wand provision, what they call a magic wand provision. And this is where you keep the parties obligated even if the exact terms of the contract are not met for whatever reason. So in this instance, if Clive or Bronze Trust does not do the 12 events in the contracted time frame, Clive is still obligated to come back and do the unmade event or events, even if that event is outside the 12-week contract period and he's already been paid in full. All right. Many contracts have this like obligatory terminology in them, to where the parties are still held liable even if the time frame of the contract has expired, okay, as written. Should any portion or part of this contract be lawfully determined unenforceable, the remaining provisions will remain in full effect and enforceable. This is a provision that every contract that you draft